Former CNN anchor Don Lemon came after Fox News this week over a lie he claims was told during Bret Baier's interview with Vice President Kamala Harris on Wednesday.
Fox News, you have a problem. You need to address this. This was one of the most egregious things in this interview, if not a flat-out lie that you aired. Watch.
Are they misguided, the 50%?
Listen,
are they stupid? What is it?
I would never say that about the American people. And in fact, if you listen to Donald Trump, if you watch any of his rallies, he's the one who tends to demean and belittle and diminish the American people. He's the one who talks about an enemy within, an enemy within, talking about the American people, suggesting he would turn the American military on the American people.
We asked that question to the former president today. Harris Faulkner had a town hall, and this is how he responded.
I heard about that. They were saying I was like threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. They're the ones doing the threatening. They do phony investigations. I've been investigated more than Alphonse Capone. He was the greatest gangster. No, it's true. No, but think of it. It's called weaponization of government. It's a terrible thing.
So,
Bret, I'm sorry, and with all due respect, that clip was not what he has been saying about the enemy within.
Lemon called out what Trump said on Fox News last Sunday.
She's right. This is what Donald Trump actually said.
Well, the people from within, we have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military, because they can't let that happen.
Now, Fox News, unless you address this, you're doing the American people and your viewers a disservice, because the people in your media bubble echo chamber will never see the truth. You put on television a flat-out lie. Are you going to fix it?
Trump doubled down on his enemy from within comments on a Fox town hall on Tuesday, saying, quote, "They're Marxists and communists and fascists, and they're sick. We have China, we have Russia, we have all these countries. If you have a smart president, they can all be handled. The more difficult you are, you know, the Pelosi's, these people, they're so sick and they're so evil," end quote. Bret Baier responded to some of the criticism he received over his interview with Harris, saying, quote, "I did make a mistake when I called for a soundbite. I was expecting a piece of The Enemy from Within from Maria Bartiromo's interview to be tied to the piece. The Trump town hall with other Fox News host Harris Faulkner, where she asked the former president about the enemy from within." Bret Baier did come out with a statement, so good on him, and he also addressed it on Fox News and explained it more. But I know Bret Baier, I think he's a nice guy. I think that that interview was aggressive, egregiously aggressive, and she handled herself very well. But with that being said, I think this was a little bit of an old trick, which is put the misstatement in and then correct it later when no one's looking, because that viewership for that interview was record. And of course, later, when you correct the record, it's a far smaller viewership, and it just smells funny. That whole interview was very aggressive towards her. It was like an interrogation, and not even coming from places of truth. I mean, there were lots of fact checks. It wasn't just that one. But, you know, good on her for pushing back, and good on him for, I guess, saying something, and good on Don Lemon for challenging them.
I agree with you that it's important for media outlets to make sure that they're getting it right the first time. The correction often does not get as much airtime as the initial mistake that gets made. I think, you know, to Bret Baier's credit, as you said, he did address this. He says this was basically a production problem. It was my understanding that his initial statement was going to be included in the clip that was played. And he also did tee it up as this was what Trump said when responding to questions about him referring to the enemy within. So he didn't say that he was going to play the original clip. It probably should have been in there. But I think that it's a bit out of bounds to say that he was being especially aggressive to Kamala Harris. If you go back about a year ago and look at an interview that he did with Donald Trump, he had exactly the same posture. He interrupted when he felt like Trump wasn't answering questions. He pushed him very hard when he didn't like the answer or when he thought Trump was saying something inaccurate. And you can put those side by side and see that Bret Baier was behaving and treating both candidates equally in terms of the posture and the tone of the interview. And I understand that it's difficult to see your candidate squirming under pressure. I don't think she did fine. She did not answer a lot of the questions that he asked her, instead reverting back to some of these platitudes about being middle class, and it's all about the bipartisan border bill and blah, 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 blah. I mean, at least she sat down for it. I'll give her credit for finally doing a challenging interview with what would be considered unfriendly media. But she should have been doing this the whole time. And I think if she had been, she would have been better prepared for that type of questioning.
I think she was fully prepared. And within the first 11 seconds of her interview, he interrupted her. And he interrupted her in every single interview where she wasn't even a question. She wasn't even able to answer the question, so much so that she said, "Can you let me?" I started to answer the question. I started to answer the question. So it was an interrogation. And if that were in a court of law, by the way, that lawyer would have been reprimanded by the judge, because you can't go after a witness that hard. And this was not journalistic. It was not what his reputation lives up to. And I think that's embarrassing for Bret Baier. And in that interview with Donald Trump, yes, it was a little bit tougher, but there have been analyses. I mean, CNN, Brian Stelter did one today going through both of those interviews side by side. The first question that was thrown to Donald Trump was a softball. The first question that was thrown to Kamala Harris, within 11 seconds, he interrupted her, and it was a Fox News talking point. And she wanted to rebut it, and she was not given that opportunity. But you know what? I think what that interview showed just as much to the very large Fox News audience, which is not all MAGA people. There's a lot of never-Trumpers. There's a lot of folks who just have Fox News on in the background, in their offices, at their gyms, at the airport. And I think what it showed was not only was she able to take tough questioning and what she deals with on a regular basis, in that her opposition wants to literally shut her up, whether they're conscious of it or not, interrupting her every single time she starts speaking. That definitely plays out when you're a viewer. Unless you're all in on MAGA and you're all in on Trump, most people saw that as very disingenuous and also misogynistic, frankly. But she also handled herself really well.
What was misogynistic about it?
They wouldn't let her talk. And that is, I mean, those are tropes.
You think it was because she was a woman that he interrupted her, and not because he was trying to be a journalist to get her to answer questions?
So journalists don't interrupt you in the middle of your sentence when you first start the sentence. And yeah, that happens a lot in media. I mean, there are great organizations that study this and show that women don't get as much media time, that women get interrupted more in the media, that women aren't able to finish their sentences as much. And we saw that not only on display in this interview for the sitting Vice President of the United States, but we also saw it on display in previous debates, in the debate with Donald Trump, where she was speaking and he was trying to bulldoze over her. It is absolutely a strategy of the far right, and a lot of, there's the strategy, and then there's just people who don't even realize they're consciously doing it. And that's the problem with misogyny. Unless you call it out, unless you're actually standing up to it and not letting them bulldoze over you, it doesn't really register for most people. But I think she's doing a great job at addressing this. And, if I were Bret Baier, I would be a little embarrassed, because having known him and been interviewed by him, I think he does a decent job for Fox News. So I don't think that was up to his reputation.
So do you think Bret Baier has internalized misogyny?
Absolutely. I think most people do.
Most people have internalized misogyny. Yeah. It's so infantilizing to talk about the vice president that way.
Understanding.
Like, she can't stand up to scrutiny that other candidates can.
She did stand up to scrutiny. That was what was amazing about it.
Well, the problem was she wasn't answering the questions.
She wasn't able to answer the question.
No, because she was filibustering. If you get asked about
11 seconds into her first,
you're doing internalized misogyny right now because you're talking over me.
No, I'm not. That's very funny. But I'm saying the filibustering, she was 11 seconds in, and she was not able to answer the question.
If the question is about what would you have done differently to prevent Laken Riley's murder, which was one of the questions, right? And then you start talking about a border bill that was introduced literally 2 weeks before she was murdered, and her killer came in to the United States 2 years prior. You're not answering the question. You're filibustering.
2 years prior was under the Trump administration, so let's talk about that. But second to that, that border bill, which he did not pass, by the way, under his administration. So it's interesting. This guy came over the border.
He couldn't have passed a border bill that wasn't introduced until 2024, Nomi.
He also was the president when he came over. So what could she have done?
Yes, and he added 90 executive actions, and she undid them all.
She was in the Senate, and she, of course, is for a bipartisan border bill, and he went against it. He pressured the Senate to move against it. So what I love about this immigration conversation is that there is no solution on the table given by Donald Trump.
HR 2.
That's going somewhere. Okay, four members of Congress.
And the bipartisan border bill is going somewhere.
Well,
I mean, it's such a double standard because the
that's
HR2
not how legislation works. You know that.
But
Four members of Congress, as opposed to almost a majority.
What about the Democrats that are opposed to the so-called bipartisan border bill?
That's how democracy works. We
Right.
compromise.
So-
Some people vote in favor, but he was the one who was against it and pressured it, and he has no solution that's viable. That's the problem. He got over the border because Donald Trump did not take action. He got over the border, and this occurred, and they tried to blame Kamala Harris, who was in the Senate at the time.
This guy was paroled by the Biden administration. That has nothing to do with Trump, Nomi. You know that.
The murder happened under the Trump administration. And
No,
he
it
came
did
over the
not. It was in
border.
2022. Literally, what are you talking? Or 2024.
The Trump administration came over the border during the Trump administration.
Her killer came over
Anyways,
in 2022, and the
anecdotes,
murder
again,
happened in
there were
2024.
no solutions from the
He was
Republicans.
released twice in sanctuary cities and
I
then
love how
killed
you
her in
focus on
Georgia.
one person, and it's like there's always going to be one person in a community that. But you know who didn't do anything about this was Donald Trump, and he has no solution. So I'd love to see the bill. I'd love to see the bill pass overwhelmingly in the Senate and Congress. But right now, he is not presenting that solution. He's campaigning on it, and he knows that he's taking advantage and trying to point the fingers at Biden and Harris when it was him he is the one who is not building that support in the Senate and in Congress. And that's reflected, by the way, in the endorsements he has. How many Republicans are endorsing Kamala Harris at this point because they know that he's not actually interested in compromise. He's not actually interested in legislation. He's not interested in any of this. He's fear-mongering. And if I were a Republican, I would be very scared. And I'd be thinking about the future of the Republican Party because he's really hurting the Republican Party. Anyways.
I would like to see Kamala Harris reenact those 90 executive actions that she undid related to the border that Trump put in place when he was in office. And I'd like to see her support HR2, which is an actual border bill with teeth that provides border security, not just greater processing to allow illegal aliens to come into the country. That's going to do it for us today on Rising. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts.